Here's my script. Could you read it?
Okay, yeah, and move that
Let's
script over
edit
here.
this part
Yeah.
out, okay? Going 10-1.
Rain dance, Sundance, Con.
Let's do this.
You guys ready?
Quiet
Thank you
on
so
set.
much for this award. Ready and action.
Welcome back to Mel Moment Mondays. I'm your host, Mel, and today I'm joined by an amazing cinematographer who makes a variety of work from music videos to narrative films, Ksusha Genenfeld. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yay! I'm so excited. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. First off, I just have to say you're like one of my favorite cinematographers today. So it's just it's a treat to have you on here. I found your work like a couple years ago, when you did one of Joshua Bassett's music videos, and I just really liked your use of color and lighting, and I tried to emulate the same style myself, have not come close. So tell me, how did you get into filmmaking?
Well, thank you for all the kind words. That means a lot. I actually used to be an actor back in the day, so that was kind of the path that I took that led me to, becoming a cinematographer. I grew up in Russia and moved to the United States when I was 15 to pursue my dream of being an actor. And I did move and I did act for quite a bit, but realized, a couple of years later that it just wasn't my thing. It wasn't my passion, something that I was really excited about. So I realized I really wanted to be behind the camera, and that was something that I was very interested in. So yeah, I guess I started being as an act, being an actor, and slowly made my way behind the camera.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That must have been like a huge move and like a risk, definitely a risk to come out here and like try and just like shoot your shot and I guess hope it lands, right?
Yeah, it was definitely crazy. I moved here by myself, moving in with an acting manager that I barely knew. So it was definitely very wild. And I think I was so young at the time that I didn't realize what I was really doing. I was just like, okay, yeah, I'll come to America and I'll be an actor. That sounds great. I don't think I really knew what laid ahead in terms of my life and what that would look like. But I'm grateful that I was able to make that decision.
Yeah. How did you get into cinematography then specifically? Did you like go to school for it or did you just like pick up the work on sets? Like how did that work for you?
Yeah, I went to school for it. I went to LMU for their undergrad film production program. And to be honest, at first, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew that I was always very, inspired by visuals. Visual language always has meant so much to me, even looking back at, films that I watched when I was a kid. I think those like iconic scenes that were very visually striking was something that I always remembered and held on to. And so, yeah, I also directed in college. I did a lot of documentary work, but I think the being a cinematographer always kind of called me, and so I through a lot of trials and errors, I realized that that's really what was my passion is making being like directing, but in directing photography. So yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, there's something so I think unique and special about like the camera where you have so much power in a film that you don't realize like you're putting your picture up on the screen. That's just like I feel like I don't know, I feel like a lot of people like want to be cinematographers, but to really like nail it and to really like go for it takes a lot of time and a lot of like perseverance because it's hard.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I remember being in college and I had so many friends that were cinematographers, and I was always so, I guess, jealous of them because I felt that I could never be as good as they were. And I felt that people didn't want to work with me and hire me. And that was really difficult. And I remember almost giving up at some point, just thinking, okay, maybe I'll just do something else because it was so tough. And there's a big learning curve, especially for me, it was with lighting. I think now because we all have phones and cameras, like we're all are so good at composition. We are able to create these shots and we kind of know different rules, like rules of third or different things that maybe you haven't even studied, but just from having a phone, you kind of understand composition versus I think lighting really does take time to learn. And I remember feeling so inadequate in that like I remember just thinking, oh my God, I'm never gonna get it. I'm never gonna understand how lighting works. And I just remember like I've talked to a lot of my DP friends about this too, but I remember the moment where it, like really clicked for me. And it almost feels like this whole world is like open to you. And you're like, oh my God, I get it. It's like uh but yeah, I think you just have to be very patient because I think there are some people that it comes really naturally to. And but I do think it's a learned craft, even if you are a natural. And for me, it took some time to really hone it in, but I'm glad that I stuck it out for sure.
Yeah, no, oh my gosh, lighting. That's also like I'm still like pretty new from out of college, and that's something I definitely struggle with, and I'm still like trying to like learn as much as I can about the lighting. What was there like a specific project you said like the light clicked and you kind of were like, "Oh yeah." Was it on a specific project that you were like, "Oh, this looks really good. Like this is like, yeah, this I could improve on this and really like this is it. Or was it
Yeah.
just kind of like a slow, like you kind of just reflect and was like, oh, I think my lighting's getting a little bit better.
I remember, I think where I really learned the most was from my friend Megan Stacy, who's a cinematographer, and she also went to the same school as me, but she's 4 years, I think she was 4 years ahead of me. So I was a freshman, she was a senior, and when I was graduating, she needed somebody to gaff her feature film, and it was a fairly low budget feature, and we met, and she was like, "You should come and you should light for me." And I remember feeling so intimidated by her and in like, in a healthy way, but I learned so much from her. I just remember like the most simple things where it was a very, you know, not run and gun, but it was definitely a low budget film. And we only had three lights. We had like a light mat, a light panel, and like a tweenie or something. It was very minimal. And I remember we were in a room kind of like where I am, where it's white walls everywhere and we're shooting. And I just remember her putting like Duvetine up on the walls and explaining to me, like, yeah, this is what you do to create, shadow. This is neg fill. And I just remember like my brain was just blowing it up, and I was like, oh, okay. But, we did a lot of things like that on the feature where we had such minimal lighting. And I really learned you know, how to light from her. I think she really inspired me. And, it's a combination of things. I think once you work more and more on set, it starts to click more. But I do think like I learned a lot in college, but to be honest, the most I really learned was from being on set and working under DPs as a first AC or gaffer or key grip or an electric because I did a lot of crew work. Um, and I think just always trying to see what they're doing was really helpful.
Yeah, I feel like definitely what you said about like the film school versus just kind of picking it up on the job. There's so much more that you can just learn on the job versus, in school. At least that's also been my experience.
Yeah.
But this kind of like leads right into the next question of like, how do you craft a scene? Like you have such a variety of work that you do. Obviously like music videos like Joshua Bassett, but also I saw on your website like commercials, ads, and then like narratives like Godspeed I think is one that you worked on that you're very proud of. So like how do those do they change? Does your mindset change when you go into a music video being like it's gonna look this way versus like an ad obviously or a narrative film, or is it kind of you just what's your process?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's always different. And I think it's it comes really from conversations with producers and director and client and see what they're really looking for. I think a lot of projects tend to be very, commercial looking, kind of very lit and, having that high contrast lighting, but then there's also other jobs where, director really wants to push for a specific look and do like low-key lighting and having a lot of depth or having it to be gritty or very um grainy and things like that. So I think it's really, project by project, it changes so much, but I think I do try to keep a bit of like my own style, my own thread throughout all my work. Um, there's certain things, the way that I compose and the way that I light, even though it might be slightly different style, I still try to sprinkle a little bit of Ksusha in there of like what I like. But yeah, I mean, and a lot of times, especially with narrative projects and music videos where you get a bit more, say in what things look like, sometimes I'll suggest things like, "Hey, I was seeing this film as this. What do you think?" So it's always a conversation. But that's like my favorite part of making anything is when you have that time to for pre-production and to discuss really what you want to make, and then seeing that come to fruition is really, really rewarding. Um, so yeah, I guess I would say it's really just depends.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have like specific things that you do on set? Just as like a camera person, like you get on set, what's like the first thing you do?
Oh God. Um, I think like getting on set, I always try to take a couple of minutes to myself and just hang out. And I try to get there as early as I can and just to, because I feel like any job you do, there's always that like slight adrenaline of, especially when it's your day one, you're always, a bit nervous or you don't know the crew maybe that well. So I try to get to set and just, you know, be there for a minute and just, obviously it's like you've scouted, the location, but it's always different when you see, the PO and all the trucks and everything's there, it's always has a different vibe to it. So I try to do that and just kind of ground myself and center myself a little bit. And then yeah, I guess I just try to find the director as soon as I can and try to, start conversations with them. Um, and make sure my crew, everyone's there. but but I do think it's nice to have a moment instead of, rolling into it and feeling like, oh my God, I gotta go. Because I feel like that always kind of interrupts my flow and what I like to do.
That's so interesting. And I think that's like a really healthy thing to do. I find myself a lot of times like, just jumping right into it, but really not taking that like one moment for myself where I'm like, okay, recollecting before like a 15-hour day, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, maybe I'll have to like start implementing that for myself. That's like a good tip.
Yeah, it's so great. And my mentor, his name is Bill Bennett. He kind of taught me that because he said, yeah, if we're doing a sunrise shot or if our call is, maybe a little bit after sunrise when the sun's up, he's like, I just love going to set before anybody's there and just walking around and just being a human before, because, being a cinematographer is one of those jobs where when you're on set, you're always on. You don't have any time to yourself. You don't have a second, to
Right.
just be able to like go take a break. Like you're always either you're shooting or you're lighting or you're talking with the director or AD. It's like there's always you don't have time to yourself. So I think it's nice for for that job to be able to take a breath before you're like, all right, here we go, and then you take another breath at lunch and then you take another breath when you wrap.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously you work with some very high-end clients. How do you deal with if something goes wrong on set or you were saying about the brainstorming and the teamwork, but what happens when, you might start butting heads like, "Ooh, you don't think this shot is going to work." How do you resolve that in like a efficient and, professional manner?
Yeah. Well, on my sets, nothing ever goes wrong. I'm just kidding. Um, yeah, I mean, I think you just have to like the way that we go into things is we always try to over prepare and we have a solid plan, but we also are ready to be able to just throw it away. I think that's something that you really have to, that should be like the mentality that you go into any shoot because yeah, things change and, you know, Like I just finished a film. We did a feature film that we just wrapped 2 weeks ago. And, a lot of things go awry, like, oh, there's a lot of traffic and a lot of people are, there's like unforeseen traffic and people are late, or our makeup is taking too long. Now we have a whole hour of like, what are we gonna do? So I think a lot of times we just talk about it with everybody and see what, how we should proceed. But I'm always trying to, if we don't have talent, I'm thinking, okay, let's get some inserts or some B-roll, or let's talk about this setup. I think trying to maximize the time is always, I think, key. And if you think, okay, the shot isn't gonna work, why don't we spend the time to maybe craft a shot that's really gonna like sell this thing, or that's really gonna elevate the project. Um, but I mean, yeah, there's always those moments of chaos where sometimes I'm sure everyone has felt this way, but sometimes when I feel like, oh my God, the shot is never gonna work. And we've been lighting this for 30 minutes and I just feel like it's not the right thing. And sometimes, I mean, this just happened again on this film. We had a lot of time to light because our actors weren't ready, and we lit a scene for 40 minutes, and I for some reason just didn't connect with it and I didn't like the lighting. So I go up to the AD and I just say, hey, how much time do I have, because how long are these actors going to take? And she's like, actually they're just landed, so you have another 40 minutes. So we ended up fully scrapping the lighting setup and doing something completely different. um, but I think you just also have to be confident in your choices. And I think that's the tricky part, is you never know exactly what the product is going to look like. But I think if you're confident in like this one shot and you're saying is going to take a while, or maybe it's not going to be fully what we imagined, but if we spend the time to really craft this and make it beautiful, it's going to be worth it, you know? So, but yeah, I think I've never been on set where things all went perfect. There's always something that kind of goes wrong. But yeah, I think we're all kind of on our toes constantly and trying to adapt and, you know, pivot. I guess, yeah, pivoting is very essential for sure.
No, yeah, it's definitely I always like be prepared for it to change is definitely a thing on set because I feel like yeah, nothing there's always nothing goes perfect on set.
Yeah, definitely not.
Do you think gear matters? Obviously there's like there's a bunch of cameras out now that like I couldn't even name them all. That people use these days on movies and film and TV shows and whatever. But do you think it matters? I mean, like, for someone starting out, like maybe a kid in high school or in college or, is trying to work their way up. How would you craft a scene with like a low budget camera versus a high budget camera? Would it change for you?
Yeah, I think it would. I would say I think gear matters to a certain extent. I think if you don't know what you're doing, it doesn't matter what kind of tools. If you have the best tools out there, your product is not going to look good. And I think if you maybe don't have the most high-end cameras, but you have the talent or you have the knowledge on how to light certain things, your film is going to look a lot better. So I do think it does matter to an extent, but you know, I gr you know, I guess growing up into, becoming a cinematographer, when I started, I didn't have access to very high-end gear. A lot of things that I shot was on, Canon C300 and little black magic cameras and Sony DSLR cameras, um and I think some of those projects were really cool and fun. I think there is something to, using a more high-end camera like an Alexa or a Venice, where I think you could be, a bit more lazy with it because it already has such a beautiful look. Um, versus I think when you're shooting on a DSLR, you really have to uh kind of spend more time into lighting and doing extra things because I think just the dynamic range and the color space is, not as great. So I think with a lot of those things, you really have to spend time, spend more time in color correction, spend more time in lighting the scene because, especially on those like lower end DSLRs, you put somebody in bright sun, it's not gonna look as good as, putting somebody in the bright sun on the Alexa. But it's funny. I remember when I was in college, for some reason, everybody, this was like the question of the year, and people would come up to each other and be like, would you rather have one of the classmates shoot your movie on an Alexa or have Roger Deakins shoot your movie on a DSLR? And most people always said, of course, Roger Deakins on a DSLR, and I do think that's a really like, real answer because it's not always about what it looks like, but it's like the way you approach making a film, it is so different. And I don't think you always need the gear. But I think once you're coming up and leveling up, there is, a certain expectation from clients and directors of a certain quality of work. So I think that is very real. But I think starting out, it doesn't really matter. And I think as long as you're putting stuff out there and you're showing people that you are, if you want to be a DP, that you are shooting, I think that's what really matters the most. I remember I used to shoot a lot, but I was also working as a first AC and a gaffer and I remember my friend telling me you should post your work, you have to let people know that you're shooting. And I always felt so embarrassed about my work and thought it wasn't good enough. Uh, but I was just kind of like, all right, fine, I'll just start posting stuff. And it honestly really worked and it really helped because yeah, if you're not advertising yourself, nobody's gonna know that you're shooting. Maybe, your close group of friends do, but that doesn't help. So I think it's always helpful to, even if you don't have access to the best cameras in the world, I think shooting and keep working on your craft and sharing that with people is gonna definitely change your career trajectory. I believe in that for sure.
Yeah, it is so interesting these days how much like sharing on social media and really getting your work out will like exponentially expedite your career.
Yeah,
Just in this
yeah.
day and age, how do you go about like, obviously you're like a cinematographer, but there's so many like I feel like these days, like short form content, TikTok things where, that's almost like the standard now. And it's kind of sad, you go to school, you work on your craft, and, maybe a client or like something, you work on, they want like a 9 by 16 like thing for their TikTok. And you're just like, oh, and they're like, oh, use my phone, and you're like, I feel like that's kind of like demoralizing a little bit. How do you like work around that if that's come up for you, or just like the whole kind of culture of it now? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think for me, I always take it as a challenge. And if they really, because yeah, people shoot spots on iPhones all the time. It's like part of it. Um, most commercials for Apple are shot on iPhone. And then there was that, I forget which one, but there was that Olivia Rodrigo music video that was all iPhone. And I think we just have to adapt with it. And the way that I think about it is yeah, it's like that's my way to that's a challenge for me. Because if the client says, yeah, let's shoot an iPhone, I'm like, all right, great, we'll make it work. Sounds good, you know. Uh, but yeah, it is tough sometimes. I think my biggest pet peeve, and I think I would say a lot of people would agree with me, is when you're shooting a 16 by 9 spot, and then they say, oh, we have 500 different aspect ratios that we want you to extract from it. And that's what I think when it really, yeah, it just crushes your soul for sure, because you can't win, you know. There's always going to be an aspect ratio that's not going to look great and perfect, and I think that's tough. But again, if it's a client wants that, and that's the commercial we're doing, it's like, all right, let's try it, you know. But it's definitely not something I would choose voluntarily to do, you know.
Right.
um but yeah, I don't know, I think I would rather do a spot that's full on, 9 by 16, and then we're just committing to that, than trying to do all the aspect ratios, you know.
Right. Right.
um yeah, because I think that's a toughie. That's a tough one for me for sure. But again, it's like we just have to adapt with the times, and you know, um who knows where the work's gonna go. It's the
Right.
industry is always ever changing, especially now. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the aspect the ratios changing is definitely, yeah, that's also one of my pet peeves. And you were saying, like camera versus an iPhone. What is your favorite gear to like work with? I know everyone has like their own camera debate that's like, "Oh, I know, I'm like an RE, like I'll die for an RE versus like Red," or, is there one that you particularly like for yourself? And then also form factor. I know like cameras are getting smaller and smaller these days. I mean, what was it, like the creator was on the FX3, like tiny
Hmm.
little thing. Like, do you prefer bigger cameras or smaller cameras? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always depends on the project, because I also shoot a lot of film. So for me, I love film cameras, and I'm sure that's a whole different can of worms. But I my definitely go-to camera has been an Alexa. So it's like I've been shooting a lot of Alexa 35, or Alexa Mini LF. I just love the sensor and the color space so much. And I just feel like, to me, it looks, I don't know, more like truest to how I see the world with my eyes. And I also am just more, familiar with the workflow. So I think having a tool that you can always rely on is always important and very helpful, especially when I approach, you know, color, because that's something that I've really, try to do it, try to get as much time of as possible. And I think, having a great colorist and knowing that color space is really important. Um, but again, like there's certain projects like, the Venice and the dual ISO function is so great. And that can be really helpful, especially when you're shooting, very, very low light project where maybe it is a bit more of a run and gun job, and you need to have more, room for not for error, but if you're shooting out on the street and you only have one light with you, it's like, yeah, that's a great camera for that. But when I have all my tools with me, I definitely tend to lean uh on the RA cameras. But yeah, I don't, you know, like I'm shooting a documentary coming up in the next couple of weeks, and we're shooting four different cameras, and uh, one of them is actually an FX3. So it's like it just really just depends on what the job calls for, but I think it's nice to have a tool that you really trust and can rely on. I think that's always really nice. It's like when I do a movie, I like to know my crew before, and it's always this feeling of security. And you look over at like your first AC, and they're like give you a little smile, and you're like, all right, we're gonna be okay. This is gonna be good. So it's like the same comfort, I think, with gear. sometimes where you're like, yeah, I know this tool really well and I feel confident that we're gonna have beautiful images.
Right. Yeah. I feel like as you said, the confidence that you know how the gear works is I feel like a big factor of like how people choose like what cameras they like. It's just the how comfortable they are with it and knowing that they can get the shot that they want instead of fumbling around trying to figure out like where is this in the menu or all of
Hmm.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's never a good idea to use a tool on a big job that you've never used before. That's for sure. And I think that's why these like smaller projects that are maybe a fun music video with friends or just a smaller music video with people that you know, it's like those are the perfect opportunities to try out, new lenses and new gear and new cameras because, you know, it's like you still know it's going to be a good product, but at least you get to like, futz around to a little bit more with that and figure out if that tool works for you.
Right.
Um, but yeah,
What was the last thing you just said? I'm like totally blanking.
I don't know.
Okay. Um Yeah, for those of you listening, sometimes the Zoom runs out and then you got to come back and film the second half and sometimes I'm just tired and can't remember things 2 seconds ago. But anyways, so yeah, the gear and it's just really interesting that yeah, having different being able to use different cameras and being comfortable with them um is very important. And obviously as you said, you shouldn't go to a high-end client and ha work with a camera you've never used before. Talking about kind of working on set with clients and moving up the ranks, how what has been your experience becoming a DP? I know you're unionized. What was your process of yeah, moving up the ranks? I know they kind of got rid of camera PAing in the past couple years. Like that, at least in New York, that's just not like a position anymore. That's
Yeah.
really filled. And I feel like that was kind of for a lot of people the way in, you move your way up doing that. Um, so how would someone who's aspiring to be, let's say, like, a union DP become that?
Yeah. Well, I feel like, well, first of all, I feel like having a goal of being a union DP is probably not a great goal because I think you just want to strive to be the best DP you can. And then if it makes sense for you to join, the union, then you do that because, there's a lot of really amazing DPs out there that mostly maybe their bread and butter is, commercials and music videos, and a lot of them don't join for many years. And they might be doing way cooler projects than DPs that are unionized. So I think a lot of it is like it does happen for you when the time is right. For me, the way that I joined was actually through being a first AC. I did because I was first ACing a lot and I did a movie that flipped um and got my days that way. But also, you know, the requirements for joining as a camera person into local 600 are there aren't that tough. So you don't have to have union days. You could just do 100 non-union days and you just have to get those within 3 years, which is honestly like very, very doable. Most people I know that are wanting to join are all kind of like, yeah, I have my days, but I'm not sure if I want to pay, $20,000 to join something that's not going to help me, because yeah, it's like it is a lot of money. And for a lot of people, it doesn't make sense to join yet because they're like, well, all my work and all my connections aren't union people. So why would I spend this money and join when I maybe do like, I don't do any union jobs. Um, So I think it's very different based on like what type of job you have because like lighting, I know for lighting crews, it is way more difficult to join the union and because you have to have union days. You can't just, submit non-union days. But but I think yeah, I think it really just depends on the work you do. I joined because of the films that I was doing, and I figured for myself, I wanted to just kind of get ahead of it. And if I were to get a union job, then I'm like good to go. Like I'm in, I'm good. And yeah, like the last two feature films I've done have been union. So that's really helpful for me because I'm able to, take those jobs. Um, but yeah, I think honestly, if you just keep doing good work and you work on projects you like and people like you and they keep hiring you, getting those days as a camera person, as being in 600 isn't really that difficult. I mean, it's still you still have to be working and doing things, but I think it is very doable and possible.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. I always feel like at least at my film school that I went to, like being in the union was like you've reached your highest point, you're in once you're in the union, but it's interesting to hear that that isn't necessarily always and shouldn't be the goal. It should really be working on the craft and then kind of recognizing whether or not the work that you are doing is more union or not, and then kind of deciding from there. Have you noticed like a difference working on union versus non-union sets versus as in terms of like vibe on set or how the set works? I know being on a union set it feels very different. But from the camera department specifically, are there any pros or cons that you would say from one or the other?
I mean, to be honest, I mean there are differences, but I think it's more just how the crews are being treated. But I think in terms of and how the days are run, but I think in terms of actual like crew to crew communication and how we are with each other, no, it's very much the same. It's not like obviously it's serious, it's always needs to be serious, I think, on set, but also we do have time to goof around and joke and how you talk to your crew should always be with respect. So like in my experience, in terms of how I talk to my crew and how we all interact with each other, isn't nothing really is different. I mean, there's certain like little rules that you have to, like you can't on a non-union set, I might be able to go up and change the light, or touch a prop or, move a chair. But on a union set, because that's not my department, I'm not allowed to do that. So I always have to, you'd have to ask other departments and delegate, that to them, which I think is also a really nice, has been a really great and helpful exercise for me because I tend to be such a like, I want things to be perfect. And sometimes I think, oh, well, if I move that thing, it's going to be better than like having somebody else take care of it. So it's been a good exercise for me to like delegate more things to other people and be like, all right, well, why don't you move that chair and I'll be at monitor and I'll actually tell you exactly where I want it versus, moving the chair, running back to the monitor, moving it back, and it's like
Right.
things like that. I think it just makes you a better collaborator and creator. I think that's um I guess I'm going kind of on a tangent here, but I do think when you're able to delegate and trust your crew, it just makes you a better filmmaker because then you get to rely on other people and really have a real collaboration instead of just, telling people exactly what you want them to do.
Exactly. No, I feel the collaboration part is so important. And I do feel like sometimes it's hard, like, to let go, so to speak, of like, oh,
Hmm.
like letting go of that control and letting, trusting your crew that they'll perform what you need to perform. Um, you live in LA and kind of New York at the same time. Do you feel like there's a difference in how productions work based on coast to coast, or what's also been your experience in that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I kind of am been super very much bi-coastal. So I have I do jobs in LA and I do jobs in New York and all the other places in between and far, far beyond. But I think, yeah, there is a difference for sure. I think the biggest difference is that people in LA are a bit more laid back, I think. I think on sets, things happen um just I don't want to say slower, but I think things happen with just a bit more of like a let's talk about it and then see if this works for us. Whereas I feel like here, and I think that just speaks to, comparing the two cities. It's like in New York crews, everything here is a bit more fast paced. So I do feel that on set, it's like people are a bit more like, all right, like we're doing it, let's do it, getting things done a little bit quicker. Um, but yeah, I mean, I, I've done more movies in New York area than I have in LA area, which is, you know, has been a little bit different with how you collaborate with people. But I think if overall it's really very similar. I think it's just more about the pace of things rather than, how the people are. Um, but yeah, I don't know. That's just what I've noticed, but I'm sure maybe other people have different opinions on it. But
No, I definitely think you're right in some aspect. I grew up in California myself, so I kind of like know the speed that what you're saying and kind of how crews can be a little not laid back, but just a little bit more, I guess, understanding, I guess. I don't know. I definitely feel like in New York there's more of a if it's not done right, I guess like we're just moving on quickly and like there's no time to really I guess recoup or communicate. I don't know.
yeah, it's like
Um,
it's hard to describe it because it's not laziness or anything like that. I think it's just the pace that people are used to working in. I think that's really just the biggest difference. It's like, um, yeah.
you're you obviously you work with a bunch of amazing people um and work on both sides of the country and as you said all in between and international and whatever how what has been your process networking I guess you can't really teach networking per se but how valuable do you think that is and from if you can think back to when you first started out and you're trying to grab clients you're trying to make a portfolio for yourself to where you are now what advice would you give and how has that process been?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. And I think everybody struggles with networking to a certain extent. In my experience, I've noticed that it's a skill that you have to work on constantly all the time because for me personally, I've never been somebody who struggled with like making friends and putting myself out there, but I think even for me being as social as I am, it can be so exhausting. And there's so many events that happen where you remember like going to this event and I was at home, like not ready and thinking, oh my God, I don't want to go anywhere. I just want to stay and like watch a movie. Um, but I was like, you kind of have to push yourself, be like, all right, no, you can, like, it's good for you to go. You have to meet new people. And I remember going to that one event and I met this director that I like love so much and we still work together all the time. So it's like all these things where, yeah, if I wouldn't have gone to that one event, my career would have been a little bit different. So, but I think a lot of people are just looking for somebody fun to be around and to talk to. It's like your work speaks for itself. So I think in those events, it's nice to just try to be yourself and, have a human to human conversation because I think, at least for me, that's what I enjoy whenever I meet crew at different events, like I'm meeting operators or gaffers. Yeah, obviously they'll tell me about things that they've worked on, but I think a lot of times for me, it's like, oh, we click and I really like you and you have good energy. Therefore, I want you around on my sets, you know? So I think I say this probably too much, but I think you just have to like be cool. You just have to be a cool person and people will gravitate towards you. And that's obviously like easier said than done because it's like, what does that mean? And I don't even know what that means either. Um, but I think the biggest part of networking is just putting yourself out there and like being easy to talk to, making other people feel comfortable because networking is everything for sure. Like you can't get anywhere without networking, you know. I've seen it so many times of different friends of mine that are cinematographers and like other positions where they're so talented and their work is so good, but they are really bad at talking to other people and they aren't working as much as I think other people that are maybe um, have that like that skill that's really honed in, that's really good, but maybe they're cinematography, it's still great, but maybe it's not like as elevated. But those people will get more work because people just want to be around like nice people. And I think, that whole era of like working with assholes is definitely, I think those people are getting weeded out a lot more, which has been, I think, really great. And I love that. So yeah, I think yeah, you just have to, people want to help each other. And I think when I first started, I was telling, meeting producers and directors at different events, telling them I want to be a DP and here's my work. And, they never hired me for big projects, but, as soon as, as long as I like stayed in touch with them, they would still, hit me up and say, hey, I have this project. It's like, $200 a day. We're shooting, like, I remember shooting a car show on my Sony. God, what is that Sony? I don't even remember, but a DSLR camera where I had like a little gimbal and I shot a car show, and it was like something that I don't even know where that project is. I don't think I ever saw that project, but saying yes to that and showing up and being like fun to be around, it led to more work, or meeting more people. Like I met another producer on that job, or I met, you know, somebody else. And I think something that I always tell like my friends that are maybe trying to get into the industry, it's like you never know who you're talking to. Sometimes you could go on set and meet somebody that you maybe think isn't as important. A lot of people kind of look down to PAs, which I think is, always makes me upset. But, you meet a PA and you decide to be rude to that person. And you're like, oh, I don't care. Like, just bring me this, like, get out of my face or whatever. But you never know. First of all, though, that person could just be there helping out and they could be somebody who could get you your next job. Um, or maybe in a couple of years they'll go on to direct and they'll be looking for crew. But also even besides that, just like be nice. It doesn't really matter what a person could get you, but just overall just be a nice person. But also, I met, that's what happened with me and a friend of mine. We were shooting like a Skims commercial and he was a PA and I was just like being cool with him and now he's like doing amazing things and amazing work and like that connection is still there. So I think you never know who you're gonna meet and you just have to always be open. Um,
Yeah.
you know.
That's so true. Just being nice to people because you really don't know who you're talking to. It's such like a it feels like such a large community, but the film community is so small.
Oh yeah.
So I feel like that's just something that I've noticed over time, and yeah, you just really got to have take your charisma, be nice, be cool.
Yeah.
And you said, your work shows for itself, but being a DP in a male-dominated world, have you felt any um any I guess being treated differently on set because of that? I've had, there's a range of different answers here that I've heard from different people depending on, what they do. But I feel like it is something that is, um, in film school at least, I feel like, you take cinematography classes and 90% is guys and you're like one of two, women in the class trying to compete with these people. Do you think it should be a competition, or does it feel like a competition in a way? Or you just kind of your experience, yeah, as a female DP in the camera department.
Yeah. I mean, I think like going back to what I was saying earlier is like comparing myself to all these cinematographers even in college. Yeah, I felt very um yeah, I just felt like I wasn't good enough, and I did feel that where all my guy friends that were DPs were getting hired for a lot of projects when we were in college, and like I wasn't really given those chances. Um and yeah, I did take cinematography class, and it was, you know, three women in that class out of, 15. So I think it is changing, and it's changing rapidly in terms of, more women being cinematographers. But I think on the larger scale, um, it's really been the same for a long time, And I think like maybe we see certain changes that are happening, but I don't think they're big enough, Um, but I think it's like there's a superpower in it as well, right? Like being a woman DP, I think you, as any woman in any industry, I think you have to work so much harder, and there's way less room for error. I think there is this pressure of you have to be perfect. You have to, um, just put more work in, and be a certain way. Like you can't be too feminine, and there I think, yeah, there's so many levels to that, and layers. But people are looking for diversity in their crews, and part of it is not just working with men. So I think sometimes that helps me, and is an advantage to me, where people are looking for, they're like, oh, we really want a woman cinematographer for this project because of the subject, or maybe there's a lot of like nudity scenes, and the actors would be more like, the women would be more comfortable if it's a woman DP, things like that, that I think can be helpful, because there is a way smaller pool of women that are cinematographers. Um, so in that way, it's like, yeah, you get to choose out of like 30 women DPs, not worldwide, but I'm just giving an example, like versus like decide, picking a man out of 100, man DPs. So I think that can be helpful. It's like you kind of just have to ride that wave, and try to make it serve you, even though it's tough, and I don't want to be hired just because of my gender. I want to be hired because I'm good at what I do. But with the politics and how it all works, sometimes it's like, yeah, okay, I'll use whatever I can to, get that job, or advance more. Um, but yeah, I do feel like overall, it is harder. It doesn't happen as much, but maybe it's because I look a little older, but when I first started out being a DP, like my first feature film I did, I was 24 years old. And I remember getting to set and people were asking me if I was a PA or if I was doing makeup or if I was part of wardrobe, you know. And I know those questions are mostly because I was like a young woman at the time. Um, and it hasn't happened to me in a while, thank God. But I do think those things are, those people still experience those things all the time. Where, based on your gender, there's an assumption of what you're doing on set, you know. But I think all that we can really do is just like do the best we can and just show people that like, you're like, yeah, I'm good at what I do. And it doesn't matter. And me being a woman filmmaker just makes me better and smarter and then tougher, you know. Um, yeah, I think I try to look at it as like an advantage. And I think that makes it a little bit easier, when you
No,
do
that's
face those things.
yeah, no, that's a good mindset to come into it because I feel like a lot of people, me included, like kind of come into it like, oh, this is just like you're gonna have to fight and it's gonna be hard and like it's just like annoying and you just have like such like this negative mindset, but being like, hey, like some people like there is a change now and there, people do want female DPs and we are a smaller pool, so that means I could get more work potentially. Like having that changed mindset I think is really valuable. um
Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
And it's like it's still hard, that
yeah,
like sexism is very much present in our industry, it's very much there, but um yeah, just try to kind of push because single-handedly we can't change that. And I wish that it was easier to change those things. And I do think there is, you know, developments and change that is happening. It's just, I think, a little bit too slow. And I think we just have to like adjust and um, try to push forward and push past it.
for sure. All right, we're gonna like kind of take a little bit of a different tone now. We're gonna play like the Would You Rather film edition. It's just one question, and then you answer which one you would choose. So, which one, which person would you rather work with, or like, do you prefer their work? Roger Deakins or Wes Anderson's Robert Newman,
I think I would say Roger Deakins.
and why?
Um, I just love his work because I love how he approaches the way that he is filming, and I feel like I have the same approach of like um I know like from his work and just listening to him talk, um he talks a lot about how he likes to film things and view things with like how his eyes see the world. And I really love that because that's how I like to film things and try to get it as close to, you know, to the real thing, and I think he's like an iconic filmmaker. And um yeah, I just love his movies so much and I feel like he's influenced me. I just like go to his work a lot to pull references. And yeah, and it's been cool listening to like his new podcast and like things that, his perspective on things. But yeah, and I love, all most of his work is not handheld. It's very still, or he loves like Dolly and Steadicam and, other like cranes. I do love that way of filmmaking. I think when it really calls for it, I love handheld work, but I definitely tend to kind of lean towards more of, smooth or still frames. And he does, that's like all he does. I mean, I think maybe he's done some handheld work. I'm sure he has, but it's not what he does anymore, that's for sure. So, so yeah, that's I
Would
guess
you
that's
say
my answer.
he's your favorite cinematographer, or is there someone else that you would also put in there for your top few?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough question. I feel like I try not to answer that just because I try to like, have borrow things from different people that I'm inspired by because I think with me, I tend to maybe I'm too overcritical of other DPs, but I feel like there's like certain films that I really enjoy from them, but there's certain work that I don't. So I think I'm always kind of trying to borrow or not borrow, but like, be inspired from a variety of filmmakers. But he's definitely one of my top favorites, I guess, if you could say that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like yeah, a lot of it that's a hard I hate getting that question myself because again, or like what's your favorite movie? Because it like always like changes and there's aspects of different things at different times that you can like pull out and
Yeah.
take from it. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So you don't have a favorite movie?
No. Well, I mean, the one that I tell people is probably like Dunkirk, Little Women, and Ratatouille for my top three.
Those are so different. I love that.
I know they're all kind of like they are all very different, but again, like every year there's a new film that comes out. I'm like, wow, like that's like amazing, and then I have to like kind of think about what my favorite movie is. But
That's
anyways,
funny. I love that. Yeah. Yeah, I just love slow movies. I love low coverage, slow films.
like
That's like
give me an example.
my one of my favorite films. I think it's one of the best movies of all time. I love Stalker,
Ooh.
by Tarkovsky. I think that is like such a genius film. I just think it's perfect. I love it so much. And it's so beautiful and the story is so great and the ending is perfect. I just love it so much. It's great. And they do a lot of like low coverage still, or they have a shot, like a 10-minute shot on the dolly. I mean, it's really cool. So I guess maybe I have a favorite film. I guess it's that one, but
Everyone
yeah.
go watch Stalker now.
Yeah, seriously. I feel like every time I watch it, I always learn something new about it. So
Yeah.
it's cool.
Yeah. And then kind of rolling into our final question here. I asked this to everyone. What if you could tell your younger self what advice would you give them when they're, jumping into this crazy industry, and just navigating this world?
Oh my God. Um, that's so hard. That's a hard question. I mean, I think like hang in there and um I feel like for me, maybe just like listen to your gut and be nice to yourself, because I think I went through a moment where I wanted to be a DP for so long and so bad. And I got so comfortable with being, doing other jobs like being a first AC. Um, for a long time, I felt that I got really comfortable. And I was like, well, maybe I remember thinking to myself, maybe being a DP isn't what I'm supposed to do. Maybe it's okay that and obviously being a first AC is such an incredible job, such an incredible position. But to me, I was like, yeah, maybe I'm meant to be a first, and this is like my path. And I was really comfortable, and I was, you know, making good money. I was happy. I felt like I had a really good life, like career, life balance. Um, and I was very comfortable for a long time. And I somehow, I don't know how, but I like snapped out of it. And I was like, wait, no, I want to chase my dream. I want to do what I wanted to do for so long. Um, but yeah, I think like maybe advice I could say it's like be kind, but don't get too comfortable. and really go for what you want, and follow your dreams. Because I think there's nothing better than saying I tried all that I could, and then if you don't get to a certain point where you really want to be, I think that's fine. But I think for me personally, it's telling myself that I did the best that I could, and that's something that has been really important to me. Um, Especially on like bidding on jobs and doing different things. It's like sometimes I'm like, oh, I need to make this lookbook and I need to do this, I need to do that. You get a bit lazy. And then I always have to like, wait, no, you have to work hard and you like make this fucking lookbook and do your best. Because then at least if you don't get the job, well, I tried my best. I did all that I could to get to this place versus I think, slacking and then being like, oh, well, whoopsie, I guess another one will come along, but that's not how you really succeed.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, and just being nice to yourself. I think we beat ourselves up so much. But yeah, I guess those are just like emotional pep talks and not real advice, but
No, that's fantastic. I mean, lay all your cards out, make sure you put all of the effort in that you think that you can, and obviously be kind. Yeah.
yeah.
No, good, good. That's good advice.
Just like the most generic thing, like just be kind to yourself. You got it. You
Woo!
know.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been like a long time coming, and I'm just so honored to that you wanted that you agreed to do this and
Oh,
was able to talk to me. So yeah,
yeah. Thank you so much. It's been so nice talking to you.
yeah. How can people find you on social media or like see your work?
Well, they could just find me on Instagram. It's just my name, Ksusha Genenfeld, and I have a website where I post my work. But yeah, I think it's just like I treat my Instagram as my portfolio. So I do tend to post a lot on there just with current jobs and things coming out. Yeah,
Awesome, awesome. I'll put all of that down in the description below, and yeah, just thank you again.
great. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast and want to learn more about my experience as an up and coming filmmaker or catch up on more episodes, follow me on Instagram at MELYDE12. This podcast is also available on Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Please like, subscribe, and spread the word. Thank you guys again, and that's a wrap.